Welcome to this week's NK News Podcast, recorded piecemeal on October 17th and 19th, 2018. I am your host, Jacko Zwetsloot. Today we're going to do something different. I will be previewing an NK Pro subscribers-only product, the weekly Foreign Media Monitor, a selection of translated news, analysis and opinion from Chinese, Japanese, South Korean and Russian media. This selection is then curated into an easily digestible email sent to NK Pro subscribers every Thursday. In this episode, I'll be talking to three of the curators of the Foreign Media Monitor to give you a taste of what's coming up in this week's package. But before we get to the interviews, I want to talk to you all about the new NK Shop. NK News annual shop is back in business for the holiday season. It's all online, and Chad and the team have really stepped up their game this year and have extremely limited edition retro t-shirts, 2019 calendars, postcards, and my personal favorite, the Andy Warhol inspired North Korea canned goods posters and vintage DPRK travel posters. Listeners of this podcast can get 10% off their entire purchase, that is, by using the code NKPodcast10, that's NKPodcast10, one word, at the checkout. Just go to nkshop.org to see what's in stock this year. They'd make really great gifts for any North Korea watcher. Okay, now let's get to the interviews. My very first interview with a Foreign Media Monitor is with John Petrushka, based in the east of the United States of America. Are you there, John?
I am. It's great to be here.
Thanks for being online and being available. What time is it there where you are?
It's about 5:15 a.m., but one of the best times of the day, in my opinion.
Are you normally up at this hour?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no.
Okay, well, thanks for being up today. Could you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself? Who are you and how did you end up doing this work?
Sure. So I moved to Washington, D.C. about 8 years ago when I started college here, and I've studied international affairs, Asia, business, and the Chinese language in college and then later on in grad school. And I've always had an interest in both North and South Korea, despite the fact that I studied Chinese. And when this opportunity came to me about 3.5 years ago through one of my professors at Georgetown, I decided that it seemed interesting because it was the perfect opportunity really to do both, to look at what was going on in North Korea through the lens of China, which I had studied, both to keep up with what was going on in North Korea, to see some of the trends in the relationship between China and North Korea, and also to keep up my Chinese language skills.
That's certainly an excellent way of killing a number of birds with one stone, isn't it?
It certainly is.
Now, I have here in front of me the your contribution to this week's Media Monitor, and I thought we'd talk about a couple of the stories from there. You've got 5 for this week. We'll see how we go in the time allotted to us. Let's start with the representatives of Kim Il-sung University, which is probably familiar to all NK News listeners and NK News Podcast listeners, but the Hunan Normal University, which we might not all be familiar with. In fact, I first misread it as the Human Normal University. Complete mistake there. Anyway, so they had a meeting this week between reps of those two universities. What's going on there?
Yes, essentially the two held a bilateral academic conference, and this is a trend that we're seeing more and more with Chinese universities and Kim Il-sung University, especially in the last 6 months since the improvement of relations between North Korea and China. Essentially, academics from both universities got together at Hunan Normal University, which is in Hunan province in central China, and they held a conference that was really focused on best practices in higher education. But of course, a lot of the focus at the conference was on North Korea and on Kim Il-sung University. I believe it was one of the deans of Kim Il-sung University, or one of the department heads, was there and talked about the fact that Hunan Normal University, Kim Il-sung University was the only university in North Korea to have relationships with universities in central China as well as all over China.
Do you know if internet connections were discussed as part of modern educational methods?
They did talk a bit about online learning and topics of that nature. Internet connections specifically, I don't believe were discussed. It's a bit of a topic that tends to get avoided, I believe, both in North Korean and Chinese media.
Well, let's talk about the Pope and the Holy See. There's some interest in North Korea in following China's footsteps?
This article really is more speculation on the part of actually folks who write in Chinese but are outside China. on what North Korea's future is going to be. What they're seeing essentially is the fact that China has cultivated over the past few years. Both China and the Vatican have improved their relationship. And the authors of this piece are speculating that North Korea wants to improve its image around the world by following in the footsteps of China and trying to cultivate a better relationship with the Vatican as well. And so there was some discussion about the recent invitation of the Pope to visit North Korea in that article, and that's essentially what that speculation is about there.
Yes, that was delivered verbally by Kim Jong-un to Moon Jae-in during their last summit together, wasn't it?
That's correct.
So, but we haven't yet heard anything from the Vatican yet about whether the Pope will be going.
That's correct. And the article itself, when it talked about the possibility of the Pope improving that relationship with North Korea, most of it focused on sort of the history of engagement between North Korea prior to North Korea, Korea as a whole, and both the Vatican and other religious institutions throughout the world. It wasn't quite as relevant to what was going on today as it was more of a historical overview. But there was certainly a lot of good points made in that article, and something that oftentimes gets forgotten when examining North Korea and the history of North Korea is that Pyongyang used to be, I guess, the capital, so to speak, of religious engagement between Korea and the world. 100 years ago, or just less than 100 years ago, there were dozens of churches in Pyongyang. So it's interesting to see that potentially coming full circle.
Yes, I believe the late Billy Graham's wife was either born and or educated in Pyongyang.
I do recall hearing that.
So it was Pyongyang was once referred to as the Jerusalem of the East by Christian missionaries.
I think it's a long way from that now, but perhaps that'll change.
Indeed. Now, I understand that the Tumen River Forum was hosted by Yanbian University just in the last week. What's that all about?
Yes, the Tumen River Forum has been hosted for 10 years now on an annual basis, but this year it's drawn more attention. What China is really hoping to do as part of its improved relationship with North Korea and North Korea's interest in engaging with the world and potentially opening its economy is that China is really looking to make that both North Korea and the Korean Peninsula a centerpiece, along with Northeast China, of its plan to reinvigorate all of Northeast Asia. So the conference this year had a lot of focus both on what is going on in North and South Korea, a lot of discussion by North Korean academics about the positive impact of the three meetings between Kim Jong-un and Xi Jinping, which is a common refrain in North Korean statements to Chinese media, as well as the summit meeting in June between President Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. And as a result of that, they're looking at these Chinese as well as Japanese, North Korean, South Korean, Russian academics were discussing ways that the region as a whole, all of Northeast Asia, might be reinvigorated as a result of these new openings in North Korea. The Chinese organizers of this conference did really play up some of the changes that are underway, referring to them as the opportunity of a lifetime and kind of the eve of the golden age of economic cooperation in Northeast Asia. Of course, there's a lot that still remains to be seen from both sides of the Yalu River, but also between North and South Korea as to what form that might take. But for the past several months, China really has been hitting that refrain hard. They're hoping that North Korea will open its economy both to bring it more in line with the international community and, of course, to benefit both China and North Korea from a trade perspective, but also to generate an economic boost to Northeast China and Northeast Asia. It's a region of China that has in recent years lagged a bit behind some of the faster growth in other parts of the country.
And finally, our last story for today, let's talk about the border city of Dandong. You've got something from a Singapore TV program about how sanctions have affected that border city?
That's correct. And this is something that sometimes does happen within Chinese media. Occasionally there is a bit of a dearth of coverage in the mainland because the nature of the media landscape there is that it is controlled and there is some sensitivity to too much getting out about North Korea. So occasionally I'll find something interesting from Taiwan, Singapore, Hong Kong, or even elsewhere because the Chinese language is used in each of those places. And the program that was aired last week on this Singapore news channel It was a program called Focal Point. And they essentially went through the city of Dandong and looked at some of the different trends underway there with North Korean merchants as well as businesses that have North Koreans employed. And a lot of the information that was coming out of that is similar to what we've seen in the past, a lot of reporting from places like Taiwan about Dandong, seeing the engagement between North Korea and that border city of Dandong, how that changes over time. But some of it was new. A couple of interesting notes. One of the individuals interviewed as part of the program was a professor at Beijing University named Jin Dongji. It could be a Chinese of Korean descent, so that name, he may actually have a Korean name. But this professor explained that there is high demand for North Korean laborers in Dandong because the quality of their work is very high and their wages are comparatively low when lined up next to their Chinese counterparts. There was a lot of talk about that, why it is that there is demand for these laborers in North Korea. The professor noted that the trade relationship between China and North Korea has for a long time been open for 70 years, ever since the most recent sanctions. That open trade relationship has been curtailed, but there is still trade and economic engagement that takes place in private settings, such as when North Koreans go to work for Chinese companies and then repatriate some of their earnings as a source of foreign currency for the North Korean government. There were also a few other interesting notes that came from that expose. There was a Chinese business person who often works with North Korea who was interviewed. Their face was blurred out, and I imagine that the name that they gave was a pseudonym, but this person talked about the fact that the most recent round of sanctions, particularly from the U.S., had quite an impact in North Korea. And this person who worked in both trade with North Korea as well as tourism noted that a lot of staples in North Korea that were initially sold from China could not even be brought to market. And these were simple things such as chopsticks and one-time use spoons. As a result of the U.S. and other sanctions, I guess that Chinese traders were not able to bring these items to market. So
it's like the trucks are being turned back at the bridge or something.
There are still trucks that are traveling from one end to the other, but I believe that the number of goods that can be traded in North Korea has been decreased significantly. And I imagine that they didn't talk as much about, some of the nuts and bolts behind this, but I imagine that both logistically and from a customs perspective, Chinese and North Korean traders who work in that border city are having a more difficult time getting certain goods across that border as a result of the sanctions.
Yes, Dandong is always an interesting window into North Korea, and we hope that that program from Singapore and other ones continue to go there every few months to sort of keep us an update, give us an update on how things are developing there.
Absolutely. And of course, one aspect to note about this program, and they made sure to mention this during it, was when they interviewed several North Korean performers at a restaurant there who did dance performances. And they did note that they were not able to speak with any of them in private. They did get some information from them, but they were not able to speak with any of them in private, which is par for the course, both with North Korean laborers as well as in that part of China.
Yeah, that suggests that there's always a monitor around there somewhere to keep an eye on everybody.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, John, thank you very much for giving us a look into this week's Foreign Media Monitor of the Chinese language press. And we look forward to talking to you again next time. Keep up the good work.
Thank you. And it was a pleasure to be here.
Thanks very much. And now, the second of our curators of the Foreign Media Monitor, Kosuke Takahashi, joining us from Japan. Hello, Kosuke. Can you hear me?
Crystal clear.
Thank you for joining us. Can you please introduce yourself and tell us how you came to be doing this work for NK Pro?
Actually, I joined NK News almost at the beginning of the establishment of the NK News. Yes, Chad invited me to write for NK News. At that time, I was keep writing for Asia Times, and Chad read my Asia Times article a lot, so I joined NK News. And then now I was asked to do this translation job.
Each week you choose some of the most interesting and important stories and opinion pieces from Japanese language media about North Korea. So I thought we would talk about some of the stories that you've prepared for this week's Foreign Media Monitor. I understand that Japan would like to set up a liaison office in Pyongyang. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, the only Japanese government hasn't started direct talk with the North Korea, right? South Korea, US, China, Russia, almost every country started to talk with Pyongyang, but Japanese government, hasn't started yet. The thorny issue is the abduction issue. Prime Minister Abe, he has a strong dilemma, because he has been always getting his popularity by taking a hardline stance against Pyongyang, by stressing the abduction issue. But North Korea said abduction issue is already settled. No room to talk with Japan. Right? But the Japanese government has to do something, has to find some way to start the talking with the North Korea. So liaison office is one step. But Pyongyang seems like refusing to establish a liaison office in Pyongyang.
So Pyongyang is not interested?
Not interested. As long as Abe says, let's solve the abduction issue.
Does the existence of the Chosen Soren headquarters in Tokyo, or as we call it in Korea, the Jocheongnyeon, does that act, or could that act as a kind of de facto liaison office between the governments of North Korea and Japan?
Currently, no. Japanese government has so much oppressed Chosen Soren for several years. So Chosen Soren hates Japanese government. Really bad relations now. And also, Chosen Soren power is weakening in recent years. North Korean residents in Japan, they are becoming Japanese. They are becoming South Korean nationalities. They are, becoming away from the North Korea, actually.
Okay, now also this week, Prime Minister Abe left Japan for a European tour, and one of the purposes of this tour is to establish close policy coordination over North Korean issues. He seems to be following on the footsteps, or following on the heels of South Korea's President Moon Jae-in, who's doing the same thing this week.
Yes. Abe cannot start direct talk with Pyongyang, right? So the only thing he can do is, kind of the international coordination. So he is now asking for European leaders to solve the abduction issue as well as the North Korea's nuclear and missile programs. That's the only way for him. It's a kind of the engagement policy against Pyongyang by Japan, relating to the international community.
Kind of an indirect engagement via proxy.
Yes.
Do you think he has much chance of success using European nations?
I don't think so. As long as Abe's stance is to solve the abduction at first. When Abe say, let's solve the abduction issue, Pyongyang in return say, no, let's settle the unfortunate past caused by Japan. So
colonization and World War II, etc., yeah.
That's the Pyongyang's countermeasure against Japan. Not easy to start talks with each other.
Now, I'd like to talk about a couple of pieces of opinion and analysis. You've got a piece from the Toyo Keizai Online by Professor Katsuaki Yakushiji, talking about the reason why North Korea is sticking to an end-of-war declaration. Can you tell us about that, please?
Everybody knows Pyongyang stick to the end-of-war declaration, right? This Yakushiji professor says the reason why Pyongyang stick to declaration is that's a very first step towards the confidence building between the US and North Korea. That's one reason. Another reason is Kim May needs the end-of-war declaration to control hardliners in Pyongyang to achieve the denuclearization. Kim needs some persuasive material to get hardliner in Pyongyang under control.
So Professor Yakushiji says that the reason behind it is some kind of domestic politics.
Yes.
You also summarized another opinion piece this week from Diamond Online, in which a former Chosen Soren or Jocheongnyeon member is explaining the reasons why he believes Kim Jong-un wants to denuclearize by 2021. Can you tell us what's going on there?
Yes, this article was very interesting, written by, former Choson member, right? He said Kim needs to hold the 8th Congress of the Workers' Party of Korea by 2021 to review the result of Kim Jong-un's 5-year plan, which was aimed to boost economic plan, right? Economic growth. So 2021 is the end of the 5-year plan. and then he have to achieve something. That's a denuclearization. So, and then as for the US, 2021 is, of course, important, right? That's the end of the Trump's first term, right? So for Kim Jong-un, 2021 is the review time, sum up results of the 5-year plan, and also for Trump, that's the end of the first term.
2.5 years from now, it may be less.
Yes.
To fully denuclearize. That's not a long time frame. But this former member of Chosen Soren Lee Chek, he believes that Kim Jong-un sincerely wants to denuclearize within the next 2.5 years.
In the article, he said so, but I think, in fact, he doesn't think so in his heart. On the surface, this former Chosun member says Kim Jong-un will do it. But as long as I talk to the other Chosun members, they said, North Korea should have nuclear weapons, and at the same time boosting the economic growth. So they try to get the two goals.
That's the Pyongyang line, the parallel line of keeping nuclear weapons and having economic growth.
Yes. That's their real intention, as long as I talk to the Chosen Soren member.
Yeah, so why do you believe that Lee Chek in this opinion piece is arguing the opposite?
If he say what I said, his life gonna be in danger, Other Chosen Soren member may target him if he say true thing.
Okay, well, that's very interesting. Thank you very much for talking to us today, Kosuke Takahashi, and keep doing your great work in curating the Japanese media section of the Foreign Media Monitor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day. And now to our third curator of the Foreign Media Monitor. In our studio live today, Fyodor Tertitskiy. Welcome, Fyodor.
My pleasure.
For those of our listeners who don't know much about you, please introduce yourself. Who are you and how did you come to be here?
Well, currently I'm working as a news analyst for NKNews, and I also manage Russian section of the Foreign Media Monitor. I became interested in North Korea when I was a child, reading books by Andrei Lankov. I got my MA and PhD in South Korea, and since December 2017, I've been working for NKNews.
You have been looking at Russian media about North Korea for quite a while. What are some of the common themes or stories that turn up regularly in Russian media about North Korea?
Well, there are several patterns you can really indicate. The most common thing is some news coming from Russian Far East, usually related either to North Korean workers or some local officials suggesting some small projects of cooperation with North Korea, or especially North Korean fishermen, like in the last 2 or 3 or maybe 4 weeks after all these storms. There have been a lot of stories about dead fishermen found in Russian waters, or some people doing some poaching, which irritates Russian authorities or something like that.
Yes, in fact, that's the one of the stories in this week's Foreign Media Monitor is about North Korean fishermen who were rescued. So these are obviously living fishermen who are rescued in Primorsky Krai. Is that the name of a province, Primorsky Krai?
Yes, it's Maritime Province.
The Maritime. Okay, so that is in English what we know as the Maritime Province.
Exactly.
And does that include, or is that next to Vladivostok?
It is. Vladivostok is, in fact, it's very hot. It also includes the Russian-North Korean border.
Oh, okay. Very good. That's good to know. Primorsky Krai. Now, you're saying that it's the storms that sometimes push these North Korean fishermen and their not-so-strong boats out of North Korean waters and into the maritime province.
Yes, or just if these people have nowhere else to hide, they just go and stay in Russia illegally for several hours. Usually it's tolerated because humanitarian reasons, obviously.
What normally happens to these sailors? Are they returned to North Korea? Do they ever seek asylum?
I have not heard a single story about fishermen applying for asylum. Usually they are safely returned to North Korea by their own request.
What are some other common themes and stories that appear in Russian media?
Another would be Russian workers, because, as you know, the ban is coming in December 2019. By that time, all the workers should be returned to North Korea. And it does irritate officials, especially in the Far East, because these people are known to be hardworking and reliable. Although they do work in horrible conditions when it comes to safety, at least once a month you have some story of someone dying somewhere in Russia.
Now, I remember hearing from or reading in Andrei Lankov's work that a lot of early North Korean workers who went to Russia were in the timber industry, the logging industry. Is this still the majority, where the majority of North Korean workers work?
Well, this may be the case, but in the news, they usually report about people involved in some construction projects, like constructing an apartment or something like that. Because timber industry is not really, some places in Siberia is not a place where an average journalist would go.
Okay, so now it's more construction sites, and so these are, you mentioned that sometimes North Korean workers die, and these are due to construction site accidents.
Unfortunately, yes.
Now, one of the stories in this week's Foreign Media Monitor is that the Russian Foreign Ministry denies hiring North Koreans in violation of sanctions. Tell us a bit about that.
Well, my understanding is that Russia is being accused of illegally hiring North Koreans because all these workers are supposed to be returned by December 2019 and no new workers can be hired. And the position Moscow officially announced is that they don't hire any new workers. All the workers which are working and the contract signed before the implementation of the sanctions on December 2017, and they all will be returned by the deadline prescribed by the Security Council. I don't know who is right here and who is wrong.
Is it the case that, let me understand correctly here, is the Russian Foreign Ministry or is the Russian government being accused of actually hiring the workers themselves, or is it that the Russian Foreign Ministry is being accused of giving visas to new North Korean workers?
My understanding is that Russia as a state is accused of hiring these people and giving them continuous work permits. Visas, I don't think they can issue any new visas really secretly.
Okay, and we have sort of repeated stories that come up from time to time where Kim Jong-un sends warm greetings to Putin and vice versa. What's the occasion of this latest warm regards, warm greetings?
I think that this is just absolutely regular exchange between the two governments, because they congratulate each other on Liberation Day in August, on September 9 Day. Usually Putin say my congratulations and Kim Jong-un saying thank you, best wishes to you too, Vladimir Vladimirovich, which is completely ignored by Russian media but always published in Rodon Shinman.
I've seen some speculation in media this week that Kim Jong-un might actually try to meet Putin during his upcoming trip to Russia. Do you expect that'll happen?
Well, if he is going to Russia, he'll probably will meet Putin because the summit is sort of already agreed upon, and most recent news say that it will happen either in Moscow or in Vladivostok.
Okay. He met Lavrov, was that 1 or 2 months ago?
He did, and also he met Matvienko, the chairwoman of the Russian Federation Council, didn't he? That's when we agreed on the summit.
Now, what are some silly or crazy or outlandish stories about North Korea that sometimes appear in the Russian media that you don't usually include in your Foreign Media Monitor?
Actually, I usually try to sort of censor out most radical stories, which are created either by fanatical pro-government media, which says that we should immediately ally ourselves with the DPRK against the corrupt West, or something which comes from Ukraine, because as you know, due to the situation between two countries, Ukraine is now fanatically anti-Russian. So if you see some piece of analysis which says Russia is a sponsor of all world terrorism and they sponsor North Korean regime with nuclear weapons, obviously you don't want to include that in FMM.
So you're saying that there are sort of two ends of the spectrum of these radical stories that appear to be made up without any factual basis. There's both the pro-Russian government stories and there are radically anti-Russian government stories.
Yes, and usually pro-Russian government, like people who would like Putin to be more authoritarian than he is, strike a real alliance with North Korea and being even more in a position in the West than he actually is.
Yes, it's both scary but also amusing to hear that there are some people who are disappointed in Putin in not being authoritarian enough. That surely something ironic in that. Anyway, thank you very much for joining us today, Fyodor Tertitskiy, and for your constant good work in monitoring Russian language media about North Korea.
Thank you.
And don't forget, to all of our listeners, to check out the nkshop.org for North Korea-related holiday gift ideas. You can get 10% off your entire purchase by using the code NKPodcast10, that's NKPodcast10, at the checkout. Thank you, and listen again next time.